you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing? Hey, thank you so much for filling in when I was out sick.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I heard you did a very nice job, so, yeah.
Pretty empty room, so it was easy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. I'm in the lunchroom talking, and I'm looking for this chair. You're here, though. You made it. I saw your dad today. He was putting together a chair. Broke open the new janitor. He was at the office doing it? Yeah, finally, your dad opens up. He says, maybe I should read the instructions. Yeah, good luck. He doesn't do that. He's funny. He is funny. We were on the phone with him last night for like 40 minutes on his speakerphone, talking about the address. Good times. I asked him if he was going to be coming back to the office or anything like that. He said, no. He says, I'm doing mediation. I said, yeah, I heard you went back pretty quick. He said, yeah, I did. He did. Okay, here we go. Good evening, everybody. It is 6 p.m. I'm going to call the City Council study session to order. Please stand with me to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
to the
of the
flag
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
which
one
stands
nation,
one nation under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'm going to do roll. I'll start with Councilman Loy.
Here.
Councilwoman Kesty.
Present.
Councilwoman Diamond.
Present.
Councilman Henderson.
Here.
Councilman Koch.
Present.
Councilman Burns.
Present.
And Councilman Lavaca.
Here.
All right, welcome, everybody. We're going to jump right into unfinished business. The first item on the agenda is a memorandum of agreement for AFSCME, the Local 176 Sedro-Woolley Union. And I think Charlie, yes, you're going to be doing this.
Yep, thank you, Mayor Johnson, Council, good evening. Yeah, this item we've talked about a little bit previously. Essentially, what this MOA does is deals with some pain points that both the union and the city have had with our current contract. There are 3 elements to it, and they're kind of self-explanatory, but one deals with internal promotions, the other deals with callback pay, and the third deals with allowing the city to hire within more of the salary range than we could previously, so up to step 4. And with that, we would appreciate action if possible this evening. We've got a number of promotions that are sort of waiting to happen right now that are kind of backed up behind this MOA. But here to answer any questions council might have.
All right, any questions for Charlie? Councilman Lavaca?
I was just going to make a motion to pass this amendment, but I don't know if somebody had.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
may I please recuse myself?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Madam Mayor, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, with
I
that,
just
we.
had,
Okay, go ahead.
thanks for all your hard work on this, Charlie. The only question I had was, with all the promotions and such that are on hold, we have that allotted in our biennial budget to cover those, so there's no fiscal impact that we need to worry about.
Correct. No fiscal impact to worry about.
Okay.
We can handle all of those.
Thank you.
Very good. Any others? Councilman Koch, do you have any questions?
I don't, thank you.
Okay. So with that, we had a motion by Councilman Lavaca, seconded by Councilwoman Diamond. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions?
I recuse myself.
Okay, yep, thank you. Okay, motion passes. Moving on to the next item, which is the amendment of Chapter 1604, the Sedro-Woolley Municipal Code, to allow shadow platting. So we do have someone here who would also like to speak to it. Nicole, when you're through giving your assessment, Patrick Hayden would also like to speak to it. He does have a comment. I realize we have the comments, public comments at the end, but this might be appropriate to provide with what you have to share.
Yeah, I think he would prefer to do it as part of the discussion, so.
Sure, sure.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So at the April 10th meeting, the council reviewed draft ordinance 2070-24, but chose to delay action to gather public input and to assess the potential impacts on schools, emergency services, and city infrastructure. So tonight I'm just providing an update on those efforts. So in our housing strategies survey that we sent out to the community, we got 44 responses and 74% expressed some level of support for shadow platting, while 25% opposed it. So I realize the sample size is small, but it does indicate notable public interest in the approach. So shadow platting, it allows large lots to be subdivided below the standard density as long as the future development meets 4 units per acre. So this enables gradual growth while maintaining long-term planning goals. And our land capacity analysis shows room for almost 2,000 new housing units within our undeveloped and underdeveloped properties in the city limits and the UGA. So that's an important factor to consider as we plan for our projected population increase by 2045 of nearly 5,000 people. So this strategy provides property owners with flexibility, making small-scale development more feasible for them, and prevents larger, sudden developments that constrain city resources. It also supports infill development, aligning with the Growth Management Act by making better use of existing infrastructure rather than expanding into the UGA. Some concerns have been raised about developers using shadow platting for profit and its impact on neighborhood character. However, it's good to remember property owners retain full control over whether they are to sell their property. And all development must still meet all the zoning and design standards that apply. So unlike large-scale subdivisions, shadow platting allows for gradual, less disruptive growth, giving service providers time to plan accordingly. Given the benefits and the public support that we've seen, staff does recommend moving forward with adopting shadow platting as a development tool. We plan to bring draft ordinance 2070-24 back for council action at a future regular meeting. That being said, we did receive a couple of public comments on the matter prior to the meeting, hoping that you had a chance to review those too. One from the Lil Greens, who have interest in shadow platting and have expressed their support for the city implementing this tool, and the other from our former city attorney and planner, Pat Hayden, and he's in the audience today. So Pat's comments did provide some valuable insight into the potential flaws with the proposed code language as written, and I agree with his assertions that we should add language in that requires those who apply for shadow plats to, one, undergo the SEPA environmental review process for the property as a whole. Under the SEPA exemptions, subdivisions of 4 units or less are exempt from environmental review, which could become problematic with shadow platting because the SEPA determinations that we issue, they do allow us to apply binding conditions of approval to projects. And so since shadow plats are non-binding, that could place a burden on the city or other property owners trying to fill infrastructure gaps if properties remain undeveloped at full capacity. The other good point he made was to add language that sewer be required to be put in. Public works standards stipulate that the development is located, if the development is located within or outside of 200 feet from a main line, you're not required to connect to city sewer, and you can install septic. Again, that becomes a problem for the city and other property owners in the event that the infrastructure gaps need to be filled. So those amendments to the code language are easy remedies to these issues. I think making those changes will result in a strong tool for helping achieve our housing goals. Again, Pat is in the audience and is welcome to share some experiences that he has had with shadow platting in the past. He has some valuable insights from how it kind of went down with the county. And I'm happy to take any questions as well.
I have a question for you. So something that I was made aware of, and I'm sure maybe you can confirm this, is that when shadow platting occurs, oftentimes then when others come in, they are the ones who are left to put in the infrastructure, the sewer and whatnot. So the cost is actually it becomes the burden of either the citizens or the city to make that happen. Is that correct?
Right, as it's written right now, that would be how it works. But yeah, if we were to update the language to make it so that whoever is applying for the shadow platting at that time put the infrastructure in when they're doing that initial development, that'll take care of that problem.
And could you also talk how that will work as far as developments as they grow? So the ease in making that happen, or the impossibility of making those developments happen naturally?
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, so if they do shadow platting, and so the sewers and other infrastructure hasn't been put in, when others come in and try to build, is that going to be a deficit for them as far as being able to bring that sewer in, bringing the infrastructure in, or will it actually create an issue in developing that?
It would create an issue, right? So if a shadow plat, I'm trying to think of an example. So if the sewer main line ends at a certain spot in the street, and an adjacent property would like to construct a shadow plat, and they put, a sewer line in that isn't the right size for like a 15 lot development. They just put one in that could serve 1 or 2 lots. And they don't continue the extension of the sewer line, and then an adjacent property next to that is like, okay, I want to do a full-scale subdivision. Now, maybe that sewer line needs to be upgraded or something like that to be able to accommodate their own development. So it does cause issues there. So by amending the language to require that the applicant for the shadow plat put in the sewer infrastructure full scale, to accommodate the property as a whole, if it were to be developed at full capacity, then that takes care of that problem.
All right, thank you. Yes, go ahead, Councilman Lavaca.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much for working on this too, Nicole. I was wondering, remind me again where the shadow plot concept came from and where we originally were talking about, because we were going to bring it back, I think, late last year. And so just if we can just kind of recap where the origins of the strato plot arrived at Sedro-Woolley.
So it kind of came up in conversation. I have some planning friends over in Mount Vernon that shared the idea, the concept with me that they have in code. It was kind of in response to a number of folks in the community that have interest in shadow platting, where they have larger lots and they're just interested in putting 1 or 2 lots on their larger property. But because of that 4 unit per acre density minimum, they weren't able to do a full-scale subdivision, just for mostly financial reasons. But so I reached out to my friends at Mount Vernon and found out about shadow platting and thought it would be a good tool. Walking into the comprehensive plan update, where we're needing to really think about infill development and as a tool to achieve our housing issues there, it's another tool for opening up subdivision for property owners as opposed to just developers.
So you have to have a minimum of 1 acre, if I remember correctly. You couldn't do it like a half acre split in 2. It would have to be a minimum of 1 acre.
There's no minimum per se, so you could do this on a smaller property where, maybe it has enough space for 4 units or 4 lots, excuse me. But say they just want to do 1 lot for now, and they just don't have the money to do 4 lots, then they could use it. So there's no minimum. It's really just the density issue.
And so my last question is there a way to kind of regulate so we don't have, every 1 acre, half acre lot subdividing? I don't foresee it being a chain reaction like the ADUs, but let's say it is. Is there a way to regulate where we're seeing it grow, or there's a lot of applications, or people are wanting to densify in all these neighborhoods everywhere? Can that be written in there, or?
Yeah, we can put restrictions in as we see fit. If we want to have a minimum 1 acre to apply for a shadow plat, then that is something we can do.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking so much like, if it's 1 acre, but like if there's, are we able to do like, okay, you can shadow plot 1 unit out of your acre rather than all 4? Or is there a minimum you gotta do, basically 1 to every quarter acre?
So there's really no limitation as far as restrictions that we can apply. What shadow platting does is ensures that over time, the minimum for dwelling units per acre is met. So as long as we have that baseline provision written in here, then we can kind of add restrictions as we see fit.
Thank you.
Councilman Henderson?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Nikki. I'm sorry, that's not your name, it's Nicole.
Close.
I saw Nikki up on the thing. So you touched on the community engagement. Can you go over, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation about impacts we would have on school EMS and our wastewater services?
So the two are separate. So we had the housing strategy survey, which included a question about using shadow platting as a tool in our municipal code. And then the emergency services and infrastructure and that sort of thing. It's kind of a separate discussion. So which would you like me to touch on?
Well, we went over the survey. I'd like to go over, you had mentioned school EMS, wastewater services, and what impact shadow platting would have on that. Can you touch on that some more?
Right. So really the basics come down to each development will still have impact fees associated. So anytime you construct a unit, it's going to apply impact fees for school, impact fees for transportation, police mitigation fees, those sorts of things. So this doesn't change anything about those requirements. They still apply every time you build.
Okay. And so the minimum density is R4. What's the minimum lot size that we have on the books?
Depends on what zone you're in. So in the least dense residential zone, R5, your minimum lot size is 8,400 square feet. For the medium density, R7, it is 6,000 square feet. And then our R15 zone has no minimum lot size.
R7. Okay. And so what would be the difference between, say I have a 3-acre property, what would be the difference between shadow platting it and short platting it?
So if you were to shadow plat it, that would allow you to do, let me give an example. So a 1-acre lot, and I'm not going to get into the infrastructure constraints just for the sake of easy math, but if you were to do a shadow plat on a 1-acre lot and you're in R5, so 5 units per acre, you would be required under, I guess let's use a long plat as that example, because anything over 4 lots is a long plat. But if you were just to apply for a typical subdivision, a long plat, you would be required to put all the infrastructure in for your 5 lots and complete your final plat for the 5 lots. If you were to do a shadow plat, say, I just want to complete 2 of these 5 on paper, then I'd like to add in the stipulation that they are required to still put in the utilities for it, but the infrastructure, like you just need to provide the driveway for your 1 or 2 lots, but show on paper that you have space to provide the driveway and the additional lots, sidewalks if they're needed, all of that stuff. There's space for that for the final 3 lots that just won't be completed quite yet, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
It sounds to me like if I were to do it, if I own the property, I would not shadow plat. I'd short plat or long plat, as you said. If my intention was to develop, reading through the shadow platting, there are some cities in which I think it could work. It feels a little bit disorganized for within our city limits. I mean, you know, we all know the city limits. We know where everything's at, and it just seems kind of a disorganized way of doing it for now. We haven't seen the final stuff from the comp plan, but it doesn't feel like this is an urgent requirement to meet our comp plan for 2045. So to me, it just seems kind of like a little bit of a disorganized way of developing the town and in the way that we would densify based on that. I mean, we might not. I mean, there might be people that are just like, I don't want to do that with my property, and we might only have one person apply for it in the next 20 years. You never know, but based on what our restrictions are currently from the state and how they're very heavy-handed, making us, like, putting into law what we can and can't do, and I mean, you know that better than anybody else. I feel like opening the door more to higher densification other than what is already being crammed down our throats doesn't really work for our town right now. And the reading through what Mr. Hayden sent us about the burden of some of these utilities being put on the city and on the taxpayer, that's just, it's like being kicked when you're down already, you know, and we're trying to build a new wastewater plant, we're trying to save money for all this other stuff. And like I said, there are places that, you know, I could see this working, and I could see this working in, you know, 15, 20 years if we're having to write a new comp plan for the year 2065, and they say, okay, well, it was 4,000 last time, now it's gonna be 50,000, so, you know, which,
We have a couple other council members I want to talk to.
oh, okay. Was I rambling? Okay, so.
Yeah, that's all
kind-
good. It's all good stuff.
That's
Okay,
my thoughts on it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, first Councilman Burns and then Councilman Cock.
Would this help with the density requirements that the state's pushing down on us, so we don't just have to turn Sedro-Woolley into an apartment complex?
Yes, it would. As I stated, a lot of property owners are just not able to build as they would like on their properties just because of the financial burden that comes with developing at full-scale subdivision requirements as currently written in our subdivision code. So this kind of opens doors to not just developers building on properties.
But building a regular home as opposed to building an apartment building.
Correct.
And if we didn't do this, then we would essentially be forcing ourselves to do more high-density zoning in order to compensate. Would that be right?
Or rely on our developers to complete the middle housing for us too, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, it was my presumption that the reason that this was coming to us was kind of as a way for us to get around that high density that the state is trying to force us to do. And so I'm kind of open to any options that will keep us from having just an absolute ton of apartment complexes come in and give us a chance to let citizens develop their own property if that's what they'd like to do with it. Just like the mother-in-law cottages, the ADUs that we allow, I doubt we're going to get a whole bunch of people lining up to do this, but it does still give us the ability on paper to say that we have that density, whereas there's a probability if we give a higher density zoning to more property that a developer is going to buy that piece of property and develop it at high density. So, you know, most people who have a big lot because they like having a big yard. And sure, there's ones who don't, or maybe they have a really tiny house on that huge lot and they'd like an upgrade. I know someone who's done this out in the county, and they essentially started with the old house at the front of the property, and then they built one behind it, sold the house up front, and they just kind of kept working their way back. And now they have a nice big house with an off garage, and but it's something that took them time to develop. And they have a paved road, they have sidewalks, they put in a fire hydrant to cover the requirements. So I think if we used some of the additions that Pat Hayden wanted, that I would be open to doing this, most especially because of the density requirements the state is trying to force upon us. Because if this keeps our community a little bit more like we want it, the way that we like it, if this is that opportunity to not do the apartment buildings, then I'm more happy with it.
Yes, and just to reiterate on your point there, shadow platting does not increase the allowable density at all. It is exactly the same density, just slower. So,
All right.
Thank you.
Councilman Cock?
Yes, I can't remember if this came up when I was on the planning commission or at city council, but a gentleman came forward. I think he had a little farm, small farm, and he didn't want to farm anymore, and he wanted to develop one lot, and he didn't want to develop the whole thing. And I had a lot of sympathy for him. I also think about people who want to maybe develop just one, if you read the housing survey, and when I doorbelled, I don't know how many times people told me, I don't think my kids can afford to live in Sedro-Woolley. So if they could, put a little house for their kids and grandparents live next door kind of thing. My big concern has been voiced, and that is that the taxpayers get stuck with the costs of infrastructure, because I'm not a big fan of allowing them to put in septic systems that, I ran across some fella in my ward who had to go through that transition. It's a pretty, it's expensive. And so I'm open to it, but with Mr. Hayden, my ambivalence was curbed a little bit by Mr. Hayden's recommendations. And I also agree that, when you read the housing survey, it's very interesting that people really don't want the big apartment complexes. And they really want the character of the town to stay small. And we have to deal with this complete lack of housing in the town. And I think being creative, and I trust our planning department to not allow somebody to go whole hog and do something wrong. But I think it's a flexible approach. And I think we have to be open, we're going to be talking about cottages and ADUs. We just have to have more different types of available zoning and housing. So I think it's an interesting idea. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, go ahead, Councilwoman Diamond.
How many lots are actually available for additional apartment complexes in R15s? Because it was my understanding that in moving forward, it wouldn't even be an if or a then or an if or that in regards to shadow platting or high density. It was a matter of the fact that we didn't even have the zoning to be able to do that. Is that correct? In one of our last discussions with the planning department.
So not quite. So in the packet, I included a map, and that map, let me see if I've got page numbers for you. It's part of our land capacity analysis.
There were two maps. Is it the zoning map or the
Not
land
the
map?
zoning map. It's the one that has a lot of blue on it.
The land map, yeah.
Yeah. So all of the, I don't know what page this is on, but it's one of the very last pages of I think it's attachment 4.
I only ask because, one, I think we are restricted in our land capacity in the city.
Absolutely.
That's no secret to anybody. However, I've talked to a few different people that have been in, some of the new apartments and all the other things going up, and they're not full. They're not to capacity. It's not as if there are people that have nowhere to go. There's nowhere to rent. There's nowhere to, obviously you're not buying an apartment, right? But there are options. Whether people consider them to be affordable or not, that's a whole different ballgame. Because there's mortgages that are a lot cheaper than the rent of these new apartment complexes that have recently gone in that are supposed to be considered affordable, which are not on what we're considering the median income. And so I personally, in talking with some of the community members, talking with some people that have available property and that sorts of stuff in thinking that this would be a good solution. While it sounds wonderful to think that you've got a couple people that would do the right thing, down the road, 10 years down the road, we've literally opened the doors for all of the things we're talking about that we don't want in regards to developers buying these pieces of property and developing these little tiny subdivisions, so to speak, in various areas that they were never intended to be. Things are zoned the way that they were zoned for a reason, and I think that this is, I think it's an inappropriate use of rezoning for some of the personal property. We also have a state that's really, really pushing for high-density housing, and that's all things that we've been talking about. And as we've been talking about that, we've been told that we lost grant funding, apparently, because we did not abide by changing our code to something that we are not, by all technicality, even legally required to abide by until 6 months after our compound plan is completely completed. So on a completely different issue, I think that that was ridiculous in regards to the state and reasoning for not getting that grant funding. But to me, that's blackmail in making the cities try to do certain things and go in different directions that may or may not be in their best benefit. And we're being told then by the end of December, we will have to have ADUs allow for, a minimum of 2 ADUs per piece of property. So what would be the difference between shadow platting here and by the end of December, the state forcing us to allow for these at minimum of 2 ADUs on any specific property, falling in line very similarly with some of the same regulations? What would be the difference in council? My feeling is that if we allowed and pushed for this, we're also going to be pushed with higher density at the end of the year as well. And that stuff that's being forced on us at the end of the year is going to be considered in the comp plan. So why would we push forward now with this and then couple it with that? I guess is my question. What would be?
To avoid rezoning? Yeah, so really what we're intending to do in the planning department here is to try to really bolster up our tools that we can use to address the housing issues here. So the map that I was going to bring you to here, everything in blue is showing underdeveloped and undeveloped properties. So you can see there's actually quite a few of them within city limits. And yeah, I guess the difference between ADUs and shadow platting,
Because they've significantly increased the size of the ADUs that can be allowed, and now by allowing multiples on the same piece of property, and the owner no longer has to live on the same piece of property, there's just a lot of things that are forcing higher density housing and opportunities for housing for other people in our community, for what was mentioned is the grandparents and children and families on the same property and all of those sorts of things. I think the difference is you're just not selling that very specific lot off right away.
yeah, so I guess thinking through that, the shadow platting would allow.
I guess you're allowed 4 instead of 2.
Yeah, so shadow platting, it basically, it would allow for a couple additional lots, right? And then each of those lots would be then allowed their 2 ADUs. So I guess a little bit higher density within those areas. But granted, a developer could buy up those properties and do that exact same thing.
Right.
So there's really no difference.
But they would put in
Nicole,
the
can
infrastructure.
I jump in really quick and maybe help clarify one thing?
Yes.
Shadow plotting isn't actually creating legal lots. It is just a paper example of the lots that could be created to essentially show the state that you're doing what the state wants you to do and showing where density could occur. So there is no legal lots created with shadow platting. You're platting below the required density and using shadow platting, which is just paper, to show that you could meet what the state requires.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
ask
Council-
Nikki a
yes.
question? Hey, Nikki, so if that's the case, then why doesn't this blue map just do it for us, right? We're showing that capacity, right?
Yes, and I think what you're asking is, could they just develop at the 4 lots per acre to begin with? And the answer to that is yes. So this is a way of, I mean, I'm viewing it as a way to get around the state's requirements that you need to meet that 4 lots per acre, and just showing it on paper, but not really doing it. And instead, splitting it in half, using this overlay, essentially, non-recorded overlay that doesn't create lots, to show the state that you can meet that density requirement, not that you are going to.
And that's what we're looking at right now.
So it's semantics is what it is.
Well, it's.
Those blue sections are already showing areas that are undeveloped. And if you wanted to redevelop them, you would have to meet what the state says you have to meet. Using shadow platting essentially gets around that.
That's weird. My neighbor's house isn't there because it's blue.
Nicole, do you agree with that?
I completely agree, yes.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if I may.
Go ahead,
Thank you.
Councilman Lavaca.
Yeah, I just pointing out even, so this is a little bit of conflicting, and I hear both sides on this, which I'll I hope to touch on. But I do notice Councilman Henderson's house is on here in blue, or your neighbors. There's actually 2 little parcels there. My house is in blue. I have a pretty big lot, but that's an area that I have no desire to develop, right? So it's really hard to have a map where you see like a reflectivity of like where we are underdeveloped, but these are all like neighborhoods that we kind of feel are fairly full already. My original stance when this first came in, I believe, or at least one of the things that I was wanting to look at, was how does this benefit the average Sedro-Woolley person, right? And, I don't see a difference whether we're zoned for, R5 and somebody can go in there and develop it, or we do a shadow plot and somebody can sell those earlier, but it's still the same amount of development. It's still the same amount. So I don't quite understand how the state sees it differently. The only thing I see is that somebody that has the money can go in, buy it up and develop it all at once, and there's really nothing the city can do because they're within their legal rights. I mean, it is a zone. So my original thought, and in talking with other people, I actually know somebody who did this, where they actually sold part of their lot in a shadow plot in Mount Vernon, I believe it was, and it gave them part of their retirement. They were retiring and they didn't want to develop the whole thing, and they just wanted to get rid of a piece of their property, and they didn't want to put a bunch of money into it, and that was a huge chunk of change for them that they really enjoyed. I don't foresee a lot of the average Sedro-Woollians being able to do that without having to do a full development, which means it takes money to make money, which means we're back into a certain group of people only being able to be the ones to continue to grow their income. I feel that if somebody's got a piece of property and they want to sell a piece off, it's not changing the zoning. It's not changing any of the, I don't even understand really how the state sees it differently, but it gives them, it empowers them to have some wealth in their hands. So it takes the average Sedro-Woollian who's got an acre, and they can sell off part of that guy. How much is that going to instantly put in their pocket? How else do you get that money? You can't invest that into stocks. The stocks are, you can't do that with starting a business really quick and then building a profit. What are you going to take a loan out on your house? You're going to borrow more out of the credit cards, but an average Sedro-Woollien could actually take and have a chunk of change to put towards their kids' school, or put towards building on the lot for a grandchild, or paying down debt themselves. So I don't know. I'm torn by it. I see definitely where we're coming with the densification, but if that's coming, it's just coming through a different set of hands. It's coming through people who already have money to make money versus giving the people who are here, who are kind of tight, an ability to have a chunk of change off their own wealth already. Thanks.
All right. Yes, go ahead.
Are we sure that this map's accurate? Can you look at what you have labeled as number 15? It'd be like right up above where Les Schwab is. calls that as vacant buildable land. And that's zoned as industrial on your second map. So is that acreage in the analysis that the people who developed this?
Yeah, it's zone industrial, but it's included because we do allow live-work units in industrial.
Okay.
Go ahead, Councilman Burns.
I just wanted to make sure we had as much clarity as possible on some of the points for this. So just to verify, if I had millions of dollars in my pocket and I wanted to buy up one of these pieces of land and just fully develop it, could I do that today with the current rules that we have? If I wanted to bulldoze a house and build as many as I possibly could on one of those lots, is that legal?
Yes.
Okay. So if I instead am the homeowner on that same plot of land and want to continue to live in my house but build one additional house on that property, can I do that?
No.
Can I build 2 houses in addition to it?
How big's your property?
An acre.
No.
Okay. So essentially what we are telling people by saying no to this is, sorry, you don't have enough money, you can't do this. It's not that we're going to stop a big developer from coming in and doing it. It's the person who has a big enough lot, wants their kids to live right next door, or, okay. In doing this, I should say, in not doing this, because of the way the state perceives how we do our comp plan, we would be required to pick more properties to be higher density to meet their requirement. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, or adjust our zoning regulations elsewhere to try to achieve what we've got with our current zoning, but, you know.
So essentially, by saying yes to this, we don't have to allow as many high-density apartment buildings to be zoned, or zoning for high-density like that. Would that be
Potentially.
reasonable? Okay.
Nicole, could we require, well, say we allow shadow platting, but could we require that the infrastructure has to be put into place, even though it's shadow platting? Is that one and the same? Can you do that, or can you not do that?
We can add that into the code, yes.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, because I've had people within town that I know that have had a big lot, and they subdivided it. They said, okay, I'm gonna live on this one, you can have this one, I'm gonna divide it up, and they sold off that. Are you telling me that somehow between, I don't know, 15 years ago and now that's changed? Or what did they do that was different? Because that person had a house with a large lot, and they divided it up, sold that back lot, and built on it. You're saying that no longer exists?
Unless they had critical areas or easements or something that would qualify that larger piece of the property as being unbuildable, that's not allowed in our current code.
That someone with a large lot can't is that the right word, subdivide? You're splitting it.
Yeah.
And then
If you have like an acre lot and just split it in half or something like
Yeah,
that.
because I want to sell it to make my retirement, so I'm gonna sell that off. You're saying now that doesn't exist anymore?
Not in our current code, no.
When did the code change?
That's something I don't know right off the top of my head.
Because I know people who have done this, so it just kind of is just seeming like how all of a sudden is this not okay?
I can't speak for planners before me, I don't know, but the RCWs, they state 4 dwelling units per acre is the minimum to subdivide, and that's in our subdivision code, so if you subdivide according to the code, that's the way it's supposed to be done.
Madam Mayor,
Go ahead, Councilman Lavaca.
my question is actually for Councilwoman Kesty. So in that, how did it work out for them? It sounded like, it almost was there, they needed some coin or they wanted some coin and they sold part of their property off. Did it work out all right? Did they get what they wanted? Did they use the money how they wanted? And was there a conflict?
With what I have seen, people have been allowed to do this, so that's why it's a little bit confusing to me. Maybe because it was, I don't know, 15 years ago and it's changed since then, I'm not sure. But that's why it's all kind of confusing to me, that people who have had it, they were able to break it off. But if they're not allowed to do that and something has changed since then, I'm not for this short plating at all. I completely agree with Sarah in the thought process. But I was just curious as to when did that divide, because I didn't think that there was something where someone couldn't break up something
Yeah,
and sell it.
it really depends on when that zoning went into effect. Zoning codes do change from time to time, depending on what comes down from the state, as you know. In that example, Nicole, so let's say they had that 1 acre lot and they wanted to split it in half. They would not be able to do it, but if they did a shadow plat,
Yeah, if they did a shadow plat and showed that they could, on paper, meet the 4 units per acre density minimum,
then they could get one more
Then they-
house on there, say, for their kids or whatever, and then 2 remaining lots to be developed later on when
right,
either they sold or they develop them.
right.
Okay.
Then they could apply for future subdivision or future development applications to finish the plat as drawn in the shadow plat.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to do it.
Correct.
All right. So- Go ahead,
So,
Councilor.
real quick, so, I hear a lot of talk about apartment buildings, right, going up, and that's something we all don't want. As everybody's pretty much stated at one time or another. So we have the UMVU, which it looks like they're planning on building 2 more units down there, right?
2 more units?
Yeah, 2 more apartment buildings.
Yeah, so they're working on Beatty Square right now, which, if I remember correctly, is 138 units above commercial space.
So those were already put into place by a council before us. I actually remember the meeting when that happened. It was 5 or 6 years ago. And then there's one other R15 property on North Murdoch that's owned by the Upper Skagit tribe. And that's about the only R15 place I can find. And why that wasn't developed when John Janicki built the rest of those, I'm not really sure. Maybe he didn't own it at the time. But as far as like apartments going on around town, I mean, I've done my due diligence. I've talked to some of the developers, and they're more or less, they're pretty much wrapped up, right?
You're correct, yes.
So, when I asked earlier, do we need to do this to meet our current goals for the comp plan? The answer was no, we're good, right? We don't need to allow shadow platting to meet our current goals for the comp plan. Is that
I would
correct?
argue the opposite.
So can we have an update on this before we vote on it? Because, I mean, we haven't really seen anything from the comp plan since we've done, the public engagement and whatnot. So, like, I don't even know what the numbers are. So how do I know that in December you're not gonna tell us, all this R5 we have to make available as R15, otherwise we don't meet the standards of what our comp plan is supposed to be, and we're not gonna meet our growth for 4,800 people by 2045. So I kinda got a soft answer of no, we didn't need to do this to meet our comp plan goals, but now it feels like, well, maybe we might not.
Well, that's difficult to answer because what we're trying to do is provide different processes for folks to be able to develop housing. And we are required by the state to show that we are meeting their density requirements of 4 dwelling units per acre. So shadow platting does allow us to at least be able to do that. It allows the option for somebody to be able to do that if that's what they wanted to do. It's not required that new development happen that way. But if, like in the example of the person that wanted to split their land in half, The only other option would be to sell the whole property to a developer or become the developer. But in this case, that would allow them to be able to plat their land, sell one lot, and still meet the state requirements for providing that density. So it's connected that way through the comp plan requirement that we do allow for increased density. I hope that answers your question.
It kind of does, but my question is more, do we need to do this to pass our comp plan or not?
Well, you could probably make that argument for anything we're going to propose in the comp plan.
I mean, I guess I could, but are we meeting our growth requirement?
By adding this to the rest of the tools that we're proposing, we will be.
But without this, we won't be.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
So my question then is coupled off of that, because we were also advised that the housing and in the housing, the units that we need to be considered are based on average median income. And so in doing that, if we are heavy in needing to provide lower income housing, how are we in a position to say that what this intended purpose is going to do is to solve that, when in fact there's absolutely nothing that says that it's going to? It may not be anywhere near the average median income level at the prices that things are being built and at the point that things might be available. I mean, how would all of that actually come into play for us to know that we are in fact meeting the goals according to how we are claimed to be needing to by the state? Because to me, it's a huge catch-22. And if we're not very careful about this high-density stuff, we're going to end up being a housing community with zero industry to support it. And the only thing that's going to be supporting the city is the taxes, and we're going to tax people out of living here. And that's the thing that is horrible, because we're already taxing so significantly that I have people coming to me over and over again on fixed incomes and all of the things. I had multiple people came back and watched the council meeting online where we talked about the multifamily tax exempt. I had so many people come back to me and say, that is absolutely absurd. I cannot believe the city would even entertain that. You want a developer to come in and put in this housing, and you want me to foot that bill. How fair is that? I have lived here for 40 years. You know, like, we, as a big picture, we have to look at that, and do we have the infrastructure to support all of this additional density, and do we have the tax revenue to be able to support what's necessary here for our first responders and providing the necessary services to our community without jobs in industry and all of those sorts of things as well? And so it's needing to know kind of where that average median income is and the goal in the comp plan as far as what kind of housing is actually necessary is really important to me. So if we don't have that information, I would love to be able to gather it before we can make a decision, or at least for myself.
And Madam Mayor?
Well, I have actually, Councilman Cock has been waiting patiently. Go ahead, Councilman Cock.
I was just curious, is Mr. Hayden still in the audience? I'd love to hear from him before we wrap up this topic. Thank you.
All right, so I'll go back to Councilman LaVaca before we,
Yeah.
I want to make sure Nicole has finished her presentation as well. Yes, go ahead, Councilman LaVaca.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't know that I really, I want to say this the correct way with respect to our planning and Olympia and, all that they do, but I really don't care about their growth urban plan or anything like that as far as densification. We have our community, and we should be looking at our community. And that's kind of where I see it. So, they have all these requirements and things. I'd be curious on how many actual houses do we need? And look at all the apartments that have gone up in Burlington. I mean, you're driving right down the road. There are massive amounts of apartments. You can't tell me we're still in a shortage somehow with all these rooms. The only thing I'm looking at is, you know, the Sedro-Woolley that can make money. So there's a developers that will have money that can come in, buy a spot, make money. Or we can have somebody who is living here that doesn't got money, having an opportunity to get money in their hand. I think that's an important thing to consider. As far as densification, I couldn't see every single one of those densifying. I couldn't see every one of those saying, hey guys, we can go through and develop this one and sell it and do this, this, this. Maybe some might, but I mean, you know, just like the ADUs, there was a fear about the ADUs. I think we got 2 or 3, something like that, very small amount. And the fears just really kind of dissipated. And I think that's the same way here. As far as like the way that Olympia sees us, and it really is tit for tat because it's already zoned for that. It's just a matter of who's got the money to actually develop it. So if we had to, or if a developer really wanted to do it, they own the land to go do it. This just empowers the Sedro-Woolley. That's how I feel about it. And it's probably only going to be taken up by a few people, if anything, is the way I feel. But I've known some people that have gotten very blessed by having that chunk of change in their pocket, and they're very thankful, you know, like your friend.
Yeah, with respect to the ADUs, just so everyone knows, we've had more applications for those than you would think. So if I had to guess, 15, 20, maybe something like that. It's been picking up a lot more lately. Folks are looking at conversions mostly of unused basements or kitchen space, sheds, that sort of thing. So they're picking up. But
So just real quick on that, those are private owners of homes that are wanting to maximize costs, probably because the pinch of the market, probably because of the cost of rising property taxes and property values, and they figure they can make some extra money.
correct, yeah. BYK has taken on
That's a
2 brand new ADUs as part of their new development. But other than that, it's all been private.
Okay. Well, that's what I anticipate seeing. Like, I mean, I'm just looking at it like it would be nice to get $50,000 in my pocket, right? And it'd be like, hey, I'll put this towards this. I'll do this towards this. I'll get this. And right now, it's just not there in the market. You can pull from your 401 or loan or home asset, which are just loaning on more. It's like, this is the actual product that you own. It's your wealth. So I empower the Sedro-Woolleyans to do it. That's my view.
One other final thing, just, I know we've been, the couple council members have been asking for numbers, and I'm just struggling with how I would provide that. Maybe for the R5 zone where it's very clear as day, because it's our lowest density zone, and you're allowed single-family lots, period. But when we're talking about R7 and R15, you could choose between single-family, you could choose between duplex, you could choose between townhomes, you could choose between apartments. I don't know how I could estimate what would be developed in the future through shadow platting. I don't know a way I could provide you numbers for those.
Well,
I just have to say, I guess I'm not opposed to shadow platting. I am opposed to the idea that they can come in and just put in septic tanks rather than putting in the infrastructure, because in the end, the citizens will end up paying for that. That's my opposition to this. I don't see this as a problem, putting it in as an option with our comprehensive plan, providing that people are going to do it right.
Right.
So, go ahead, Councilman Anderson.
so earlier you said we can make it as restrictive, right, as we want. So could we make it that you can only shadow plat or short plat a R5 property, and somebody with an R15, sorry about your bad luck, right? We're just not gonna do that, and then only make it allowable for single-family lots.
We could choose to do that, yes.
I mean, there's between the way that it was initially presented and then of the idea that you got from Mount Vernon, and then having seeing what happened in the county years ago, and then having Mr. Hayden write the letter that, you know, warned us of like the unseen things that we don't get told about, right? This is something that could get reworked, but again, I don't see the need to open the door to densify now. And the other thing, Mr. Lavaca, I agree with you that, you know, it'd be nice for somebody to sell, and it'd be nice for them to make a chunk of change, you know? But the hard reality of that is, with these changes we're gonna put in there, that homeowner is gonna be paying to drag all the utilities in. The guy, you know, and it's not gonna be free of so that 50,000 now, it kind of dwindles down a little bit. And rightfully so, because development should pay for development. But if anything, what I'd like to see is how this would work into our comp plan, how this would help us meet the density requirements that we need to show, you know, on the blue map, and have that be part of us, you know, providing that comp plan to the state and saying, here you go, this is what we can do, but this isn't what we're necessarily going to do, because, you know, as Councilman Burns also said, he doesn't want to see apartments go up, neither do I. So if we make this restrictive to the point where it's not just gonna open the floodgates, so somebody, you know, says, okay, well, I wanna shadow plat my property, but I also wanna rezone it. You know, and we're gonna write a request to rezone for, you know, R15, because it's only R7, I can't really fit anything in there. And then, so I don't wanna go that route.
So, yes, go ahead, Councilwoman Kesty.
No offense to Mount Vernon, but I was just in Mount Vernon, and I don't want to do anything that Mount Vernon does, because I like Sedro-Woolley, and I think we set a very nice tone here. So I just don't see the need to open Pandora's box for this when we already have so much coming down from Olympia, and I don't really see it as much of the space to be used for something like this. So I'm just keen to just push it out altogether. That's my 2 cents. And as far as the apartment goes, there's not a lot of other areas. Yes, they are going to be putting up apartments. That's already done. And there isn't a whole lot of other areas to be putting up apartments. So that's not a push that we have to be like scared. Olympia's saying this. I just feel like we get a lot of, it ends up working out, but we get a lot of like fear into we have to do this, and I just don't really think that we need to. We have other things coming down. We'll go our way around it. This, I think, is unnecessary, in my opinion.
Councilman Burns?
Sorry, I do want to hear Pat Hayden speak, but I pulled up the map from 2-5 meeting when I believe I referred to it as a stupid way to plan, because we had a lot of changes here that were going to do the things that every council member has expressed disinterest in doing, switching property to an R15, another one to an R15. Let's see here, this one goes to an R7. I'm just clicking the bubbles that pop up on this. Change to R15 or consider for a new R10 or R12. Change to R15. I keep seeing these in here because these are the proposed changes to meet the state requirement. And I would like to eliminate every one of these bubbles if I could from our plan so that we don't have to create any more R15. And if I'm understanding correctly, this is an option to do that. Is that what we would be doing, is eliminating these bubbles from our map of changes?
One of the tools to add to our toolbox to eliminate those bubbles, yes.
Okay, so probably not
So
going to take them all out.
It won't take them all out. It's one in a set, right? So we've been working with our consultants on a number of potential housing strategies and going through that list and seeing what would be feasible for the city to possibly consider. And we'll be taking that list to the Planning Commission here shortly for discussion. So shadow platting is on that list, and it's one of several that we've been looking at. So yeah, rezone is also on that list.
Thank you. I agree with what Councilmember Lavaca said about letting people do what they want within reason with their property, but I also don't want us to get the financial spigot turned off from the state. So as much as I might dislike some of the things they're trying to force us to do, I like creative ways around it.
So, Madam Mayor, would it be wise to table this for 6 months until we get the comprehensive plan?
Yeah,
up?
there's no action tonight. It's my
All right, just
understanding that it's a
discussion.
discussion.
No idea, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a discussion item. I'm not asking for any action tonight, but I would like to welcome Pat Hayden to the stand to make some comments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As soon as you have completed your presentation?
Yes, my presentation is
Okay,
done.
and I want to make sure, okay, Director Glover, all right? So, Mr. Hayden, would you like to come forward and give a presentation?
First of all, I haven't talked to the city council for probably 15 years, so forgive me if I'm a little slow. Second, I was involved in shadow platting when I worked with the city, but it was a device Skagit County used to allow development without putting in infrastructure in our urban growth area. We had an agreement with the county that they would make people develop the city standards, and for a variety of reasons, people, who wanted to develop, let's say 5 acres or less, wanted to be able to put in larger densities, did not want to build roads, and didn't want to put in sewer for obvious reasons. So we ended up with a whole, I call it a Chinese wall of unincorporated urban growth area on Wicker Road, which is essentially developed on septic tanks, gravel gravel access roads to 5 or 7 houses. And this development prevents us essentially from annexing that part of our urban growth area without incurring the expense of the city putting in sewer and rebuilding all the infrastructure up to urban standards. In addition, you had a very active surveyor in town, nice guy, was on the council later, but he had many clients, and because he knew, there was essentially an understanding. A particular county commissioner told the county planning department, don't make people in Sedro-Woolley's urban growth area build to city standards or annex. We have a number of other lots that were developed with shadow platting where people said, okay, fine, you can in theory meet city density someday, but because we're not going to require city utilities, city infrastructure. Not a single one of these, to my knowledge, has ever been upgraded to city density. And so you have these pockets, and some of them actually are more than pockets of buildings that you can't annex unless you're going to charge the taxpayers, the sewer ratepayers, the cost of bringing up infrastructure. I don't want to talk about, say, the sale of one house or one lot. I don't really care one way or the other. I'm not crusading against that. And I also don't want to talk about large houses on large lots. I wish we could do that. I grew up in that environment. I want to talk about one thing, and that is, what's the effect of this type of decision on funding infrastructure? Who pays how much and when? Because when you look at planning and you look at the code you're writing, it has a lot of implications on the financial cost of infrastructure and utilities. And often decisions are made without people actually quantifying that and say, oh my gosh, we've got a problem now. The county gave us a problem that you don't have the money to fix. It would be $1 million or more to run sewer out to Fruitdale Road. The developed side of Fruitdale Road that should be in your urban growth area that has houses all along, they all have septic tanks. And there was a lot of people yelling when the urban growth boundary initially included those lots, and it should. They should all be put on your sewer system. But your urban growth boundary takes in the west side of Fruitdale Road, not the east side, out by the cemetery. So you have a number of problems. If you told me we're going to do shadow platting, but you've got to put in sewer, water, build your streets and everything as if you're going to do the 4 lots, I don't have a problem with it. The thing about shadow platting is it's an excuse not to do full infrastructure, which means how is it going to get paid for? Infrastructure is normally paid. Our infrastructure standards today are much more expensive than they used to be when I opened a law office in Woolley 43 years ago. Back then, you could do a 4-lot short plat inside the city limits on septic tanks with a gravel access road. And I think Central Place over off Reed or something like that is the primary example of that. So infrastructure is probably many magnitudes more expensive in terms of both standards and inflation. The problem with one lot, you cannot afford to do one lot to sell and make some money if you have to do the infrastructure for a full development. If you have to do 4 lots worth per acre worth of, actually I think our paper standard is 5 lots per acre, R5, isn't it?
4 units per acre minimum, 5 units per acre maximum.
Okay, we'll talk later. But when you look at this, I've always interpreted R5 as referring based on the square footage to the minimum density, really. But the point is, let me give you 2 examples. One is you pay for infrastructure 2 or 3 ways. One way you pay for infrastructure is through SEPA mitigation fees. SEPA mitigation fees only apply if you're doing more than 4 units. People were doing lots of short plats in Woolley when I was working for the city because they could avoid SEPA requirements and not have to put in the mitigation required by SEPA. People make fun of, oh, that's an environmental standard. But that was the tool, and the only tool the city had when I was on the Planning Commission years ago, that the city could use to make people put in infrastructure, build streets and stuff. Our codes were very old and did not, like I said, they allowed normally gravel access roads. I think the city's SEPA standard has not been changed, and so by doing 1 lot or maybe 2 half-acre lots and selling off some land, you don't have to deal with the infrastructure standards that might be imposed by SEPA. The other tool the city has is lot size as it relates to sewer, and sewer is the big dollar item, even more so than roads. So you can put in a septic tank on a 1,200 square foot lot. You cannot get 4 1,200 square foot lots out of an acre. So the impact of having 4 units per acre or 5 units or 8 units or 15 units per acre, the impact of that is you've got to be on sewer if you're going to put all those lots in. What happens when you allow people to develop at less density is you end up with septic tanks. Particularly, I think your code may still allow septic tanks if you're more than 200, is it 200 feet?
200 feet, yes.
From a sewer line. So you're going to get most of this development with septic tanks. You cannot effectively go back to a community of 4 lots or 10 lots or 2 lots and say, okay, now you guys have to disconnect from your septic tank and put in sewer. Most people can't afford it. They already have a mortgage in place. Their payments are already set. Particularly if they're of median income, it becomes financially impossible. So you end up shifting the cost of infrastructure, sewer, streets, roads, stormwater drainage from the developer onto the citizens, the ratepayers, the taxpayers, or city money. And so you have to craft this ordinance if you want to allow this so that you either you quantify and you intentionally say, fine, we're going to let you develop your lot and we're going to end up paying for the infrastructure later. Or you have to say, you can develop your lot, but you've got to fund the infrastructure, which frankly, for 1 lot, isn't going to pencil out. So you have an economy of scale that is necessary in modern standards to build that kind of infrastructure. I do not know how it pencils out today, but I suspect you have staff members and developers who can tell you what it's going to cost per unit to put in sewer, city standard streets, sidewalks, PUD water, in addition to providing fire and police services, which you pick up on your impact fees. So those two factors alone are just two ways that shadow platting could shift the cost of infrastructure, as the county did by shifting potential, upon annexation, shifting costs to the city when they let people develop in an urban growth area without putting that stuff in. If you allow people to use shadow platting to avoid infrastructure, you're just making me pay for it. Now, there is one other thing I want you to consider in looking at this. There's a lot I'm not talking about, but again, if you said you can shadow plat, but I want to see the utilities, the water, the streets for the whole development that you're not building, nobody would do it. You're going to find developers, not just people who happen to own an acre or half an acre, developers who want to do half-acre lots and also want to do, or maybe sell 2 quarter-acre lots adjacent to each other, put in a large house, because today's market is very different than it used to be. You can sell a $600,000 house in Woolley in the right location with the right hardwood floors. And, when I moved into town, you could buy a house for $40,000. So with those kind of prices, you're going to find developers who use the way your code is written to sell fairly expensive homes on large lots and not put in infrastructure. So what I'm suggested on here, and I wrote this thing in about an hour. It's not really complete. I think you need to consider 3 things. First off, I don't see any reason to change the rule that every existing lot can have 1 house. If you're not subdividing, you can still get a building permit if you meet the code for a building on every lot that meets some minimum standard. I'm not suggesting that change. The second thing is, if you have all your infrastructure in, and a lot of people who own houses in the developed part of town do have all their infrastructure in, I don't see a problem with shadow platting. I mean, if you're on Nelson Street, the sewer's in, the streets are in, the sidewalks are in, you got stormwater, it's not going to make an effect. But if you're in an area that doesn't have infrastructure, you need to have a mechanism to give the city flexibility to require SEPA compliance based upon the total possible build-out and not just the 1 lot. Or you have to recognize we're giving up that tool in the future, because you'll get 1 lot and then 1 lot and then 1 lot. While you can have phased development, you're going to be imposing the whole cost of that infrastructure for 4 lots on the last guy. And that doesn't pencil out either. So you need to figure out how you're going to apply SEPA if you do shadow platting, unless you want to give that up as a way of collecting money for infrastructure and mitigation. The second, and again, there are ways to do it, but it's not included in the draft ordinance. The second thing is that you need to figure out a mechanism to give the planning department flexibility to say, excuse me, but shadow platting doesn't work in your location because you don't have any infrastructure, and we have to find a way to fund it. And so I think shadow platting, instead of being just if you do this, instead of being an absolute right, it needs to be a special use permit or a conditional use or a variance to the lot size or something. And you need to give your planning department, your planning administrators, specific authority to make administrative decisions based on adopted standards. And one of those standards has to be that you're not shifting cost to future developers further down the road. You're not shifting cost to the last guy building the last house. And you're not shifting cost to taxpayers and ratepayers. And there's a way to do that also, but it's not in the ordinance at this point. So I just don't want to see bad shadow platting. And I don't want to see it used as an excuse, even by median income people who just need their 50,000 bucks to shift the bill to me. And not just really to me, it's to everybody else who lives in town. So those are my concerns. And I've talked enough. I'm happy to talk later in private if you want to call me. And this is not a criticism of anybody. It's just that I've seen this be abused by the county when we were dealing with this, and we have expensive consequences. So you need to do it right or not do it. Any questions? Thank you. Pleasure. I'll see you again in 15 more years.
There is one question.
Less question, more appreciation. I appreciated your letter and the information that you had in there. I agree that people should pay their fair share when they're doing something like this. If you're developing it, you should pay for that infrastructure. We should have the sewers, and it's not something that people should have to, everyone else should have to pick up 15 years later or whenever that connection has to be made. So I agree with what you had to say and
And there are
appreciate you
places in
taking the
town where
time.
the utilities and everything's in. And frankly, I don't see, I mean, if this gentleman, for example, has sewer by his property already, he might be a good candidate for this type of thing. But there are going to be a lot of places, particularly as you get further from the core. For example, you can build a road. You can build a block of road, skip a block, and build another block of road. And the sidewalks and road, they're all going to line up. When that middle piece gets built, it's not going to be a problem. You cannot build a block of sewer, skip a piece, and build a block of sewer. Sewer has to start from the center route and be built in a continuous, incremental fashion. So there are going to be places in the outer skirts, the undeveloped area, where frankly, I don't think this would work. But if sewer is fully in, the streets are in, or maybe you just need to add a sidewalk, it isn't so bad. So it's not a black and white issue. I'm not saying don't do it. Don't screw it up.
All right, thank you. Okay, that was a great discussion. Okay, moving on, we are. Oh, did you want to say something? Yes? Are you talking about shadow plotting as well?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Paul Heeb. I live at 8643 Westerman Road, and the property in question is to the south of me about a quarter of a mile. The house is on the West Jones Road, right out front, and it's on sewer, and it's the 5 acres is in the city. The rest of my land is not in the city, and we farm about 85 acres in the area there. So it's good land to crop farm. Potatoes in this last year. Had several other crops over the years. But I have a couple that lives in the house, have been renting from me for 13 years, and they would like to buy it. And I've been working on this for about a year and a half, trying to be able to sell them just the house and keep the land in farming. They sell just a lot. And so this is, shadow platting might be a good tool for this kind of a situation. So any questions that you might have?
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you. Okay. All right, moving on to new business. We have, Woody, you have a presentation that you are wanting to make regarding adding additional licenses, the Microsoft Enterprise Insight.
Yes, good evening, Madam Mayor, council members, and members of the public. So on January 22nd, the council approved our renewal for our Office 365 licensing. This new contract is for adding 30 more licenses to a new 3-year contract that will expire at the same time that our first one expires, so we can join them in when the time comes. These licenses are needed to serve for day-to-day functions for the employees, receiving emails, utilizing computer software, accessing city resources through our SharePoint sites. We didn't have time to calculate the user license counts the first time, so I just upped it by I think 2 and submitted it so we wouldn't have a lapse of service. With this new 3-year contract, the 30 licenses will be covering the expected growth and give us about 4 or 5 licenses as a buffer. I would like to note that in other organizations, IT would work with an HR person to figure out kind of the growth of the city moving forward, so we don't have lapse in licenses. Currently, we don't have an HR person, and getting everybody in the room to figure out a good 3-year plan is a bit difficult. So I kind of took advantage of some emergency operations meetings that we were discussing to take advantage of the fact that everybody was there and get a good plan for what each department expects as growth for the next 3 years. The 3-year contract will be 3 different payments starting each year. The first payment will be $12,415.20, and the last 2 will be $13,543.50. We do need these for the day-to-day functions for the new employees that will be coming on board. I believe we have 2 employees starting on the 17th, and we kind of need to expedite this. Any questions?
Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks. Thank you very much, Woody. So you're thinking that we're going to grow more than 30 people over the next 3 years. How many are we short right now, you were saying?
Right now, we are short 3. We have 2 new people starting on the 17th. We had 1 person who started, I think, sometime last week. I can't recall off the top of my head. And I am using a workaround for her account, but I'm sure as she kind of starts progressing in her role and actually doing the functions of her job, she will need to start utilizing those tools. And I currently don't have a solution for that other than removing my licenses and giving it to hers, but then I can't administrate the email exchanges and so forth.
Yeah. So you got the 3, and then you wanted a 5 buffer, which would have helped in this situation versus the 2 that you ended up with when you first did a prescription. So that's still 22 people over 3 years. Probably sounds like you're hoping for an HR person, plug jab on that one. So that would include 1. The other ones are police officers. I know we're applying for those guys. We provide them email, I'm pretty sure, through the city, correct? So, but the rest of the growth, where was that coming from without the HR available? What was
A big majority of the growth is within public works.
And fire.
That is expected to have 10 new employees within 3 years. I didn't ask for when all of those are going to be coming up, but that is what is expected within 3 years, to add 10 new positions or fill in vacant positions.
Okay. I don't know that I remember seeing that in the budget. Was that? Yeah, sounds like it was. And then so we still got about 13 other individuals. We got police officers, so 5. So it leaves us like a 12 buffer. It's not that much money. I was just curious about, where the huge growth. It sounds like it's pretty big growth for what we were doing in 3 years, and we're sounding like we're tightening the belts a little bit. So.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to tell with the PD because they will get people that come on, and other agencies kind of have a better offer. So
I think fire's expecting to grow as well, so we'll be looking at that. If there are no more questions or comments, do I have a motion? Woody is looking for action tonight on this request.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Councilman Cock and seconded by Councilman Burns to authorize the mayor to sign the purchase order of SWIT 25-022801, agreeing to the 3-year contract with Insight Public Sector for $39,502.20. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Woody.
Thank you.
Moving on to the last item of tonight, which is the repealing and replacing of Chapter 12.44 of the Special Events, Parades, and Festivals, Ordinance Number 209725. This is a first read, and Charlie, we'll turn this over to you.
Yep, I'll kick it off briefly and then turn it over to Nikki, who's joined us this evening as well. This is basically a rewrite of the special event part of the municipal code. The current part of the code is at quite a high level. This provides a lot more detail and direction to staff. I will apologize up front. I attempted to include the current version of the code in here, and I think what happened was it printed off double-sided and then it scanned one-sided, so you got every other page of that, but it's section 12.44 of the municipal code, so council can pull that up if you want to reference that tonight. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki to just kind of walk us through the proposed new code sections and some of the reasoning behind them. Nikki?
Thanks, Charlie. So as Charlie said, the old code has a lot of subjectivity that's built into it. There's not really a clear definition of special events. It uses special event, the term in the definition, or what should be the definition. It has some really wishy-washy insurance language in it. It says required, if required, provide liability insurance, but doesn't really go into a lot of detail. So this is something we've been talking about for years, but it just hasn't been a high priority to fix. So we've drafted up a new ordinance that has clear and objective definition of special events that is tied to the impact to the city and the city's resources. This is where we want council's input. We've tied it to size and as a starting point, put 50 people on public property and 100 people on private property for that triggering point of what requires a special event permit. This code also has exemptions for things like garage sales, temporary sales by businesses, funeral processions, certain fundraisers like car washes and lemonade stands, First Amendment protected activities. There's also a clear definition of other things that seem to me to be important to Sedro-Woolley, like amusement rides. You guys have a wonderful carnival every year, and it seemed important to include that specific item in this code. There's new requirements that make clear that you have to have an L&I certified individual on site during the carnivals operating the rides, so that we are ensuring the public is safe and that the carnivals aren't substandard. I know that I've seen some pretty scary carnivals, honestly. We also address things like specific types of amusement rides, like inflatables and water balls. Those are things that insurance risk pools do not like at all, because people have died getting picked up by the wind and tossed into situations that cause their death. This also has a very clear process for applying and approval, site restoration, which is really important, clear insurance and indemnification requirements, and then situations in which we can revoke the permit. So it's just a more comprehensive approach. It adds some clarity for staff. Like I said, we've been talking about the special events code for quite a while, and it is currently more difficult to administer, and hopefully council will see the wisdom in moving forward with a clearer code. Welcome feedback on the issue of how many people at an event should trigger the special event permit requirement. That would be helpful information to have.
Okay. All right, thank you, Nikki. So any comments or suggestions for Nikki? Councilman Lavaca?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I just had a question. The inflatables, so it's over 50 if you have a birthday party where you got like 30 kids out at the park or something like that. That's not going to require, I mean, you got the park permit, right? But it's not going to necessarily require a permit that'll limit that, or will we still be able to do an inflatable at the park?
So any events that would attract more than 50 people on public property would require a special event permit. But I don't believe that we allow inflatables in the park to begin with.
No, we don't.
Kelly, am I
I don't think we
correct
do.
on
it. Check
Yeah,
that.
that's what I was gonna say. We don't currently allow inflatables in our.
And then
Insurance does not like them.
And then we've seen some pretty large gatherings that get, just organically gathered. Some people start waving signs or things like that, and especially during the election season, which we've seen, those can get over, 50 pretty easy. Is that something that would require a permit? I see that we've got section G of 12440660 or 060.
So those would be activities protected by the First Amendment and would not require a special event permit.
So those would be the exemption, okay. I was wondering if they got to apply for the permit and then it's also exempt from fees, but they've got to do a notification or something
It
like
is
that.
exempt from fees
Okay,
and from indemnification requirements, I believe.
cool, thank you.
Go ahead. Councilwoman Diamond?
So if you, say you have a larger piece of property and you decide to have a wedding and invite 125 people on your own private property, you then would be required to have a permit to have that amount of people gathered on your personal property. Is that what we're clarifying this to be, or 100 is what you had mentioned?
Yeah, so we're looking for feedback on how many people you would want to be that trigger point. The idea is that we want to ensure that we are capturing impacts to public services, right? Is it going to cause a backup on the streets, or is there going to be an impact, a police-related impact or public works-related impact, garbage? We want to make sure that we are accounting for those impacts. And so if you don't like the 100 number, then, if you think that the impacts wouldn't be significant at 100 and have a different idea, then fully open to that conversation.
I was
Comments
wondering,
or questions?
yeah, are we able to, I mean, on public property, I guess a number would be rather large for me, like maybe 200 or something like that. But on private property, limiting some activities or balloons or insisting on insurance, things like that, it starts to get to be where, it's on their personal property. So I would say a much larger unreasonable number almost. If it gets that big, then we can really okay, obviously we'd want to see something 200, 250, but is that
So you
reasonable,
feel
Nick?
250 for private property?
That way, if they wanted to have a large birthday party, wedding, whatever, they could pretty much do it. Insurance is on them. It's their property. It's their event.
That would be a lot of cars. I'm
I can't
thinking
think
it would
of a
have an
place that could
impact.
house that many people, so I'm not real worried about that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's why we would have it.
Councilman Cock?
Yes, I just had two questions. One, just to follow up on what Councilman Lavaca said. So the other day we had a protest against the layoffs at the National Park Service. It was on public sidewalks, but it was, I think, in the parking lot of the National Park Service building. And I don't know how many people were there. There were a lot. So that would be protected by First Amendment, right? And when I was at the university, when there were big protests, we also could control time, place, and manner. So, for example, if somebody, for whatever reason, wanted to have a huge protest somewhere, we could move them, right? We'd have that authority.
Yeah, and you're supposed to apply for a permit even for these big political rallies, right? But we can't charge you to process the application, and we can't impose any terms or conditions that will unreasonably interfere with your First Amendment rights, right? So say you have some huge protest planned, then the proper way to do it would be to apply to the city, and the city will say, okay, well, please don't block the streets here. Please contain your protest to this area so that it won't be impacting public services. That
Yeah,
would be a time, place, manner restriction.
I'm very familiar with that. We had many large protests at Western Washington University, and when we would give them the route instructions, more time than not, they ignored it. And another issue that always miffed me was when we had big protests, we'd have to bring in Bellingham police as additional security. And you know, they're not free. They weren't free, and we had to pay for it, which, you know, I guess that's part of First Amendment, and I support it, but it is an expensive thing if you have a large protest. The second thing I was going to bring up is that down the street in my ward, I think, right down Fruitdale, there is a wedding venue. So they wouldn't be, they've got a certain number of parking places. They wouldn't be really affected by this, right? As long as they're not overflowing.
No, because that's already an established business, and the services that they're offering are a part of their approved business plan, right? So if it's within the city limits, they would have a business license that would incorporate those things into the license, right? So your license is for an event space. I don't know if it's in the city limits or right outside, but if something is permitted by a license, then it's not a special event.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilman Burns?
I appreciate the staff going through and trying to make this as thorough as possible and crossing all the T's, dotting the I's. 250 is probably a bit high on that. I don't know where people are going to park at that point, but at the same time, I doubt it's going to end up being a problem one way or the other. So if that's what the council wants to do, we have a problem with it, we come back to it, right? But the rest of it, I'm good with this. I appreciate your efforts.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Henderson?
So I didn't read through the other code. Now I know what happened. It was kind of funny, but one of the things that I'd like to make sure with doing this is that we make it a little bit kind of streamline it, I guess, to make it easier for people to not be discouraged from doing special events, parades, or festivals. I think everybody sitting up here I have seen involved in doing any number of those things year after year. And it sometimes does get a little tiring navigating through the stuff, and it almost makes you want to partner with somebody else who's willing to do the paperwork for you. So as long as it's easy and it makes sense, I'm kind of all for it. So I'll read through the differences. I'll pull that up, Charlie, and I'll read a little bit better through it. But if we could offer it to be, you know, really easy. So you want to come and do a parade, or you want to do a big concert down at the park or whatever, then more power to them.
I have a quick question. So, for example, we have like Blast from the Past. So when you have Blast from the Past, we have the street fair that generally happens in the middle of town. Everything can change year to year. So you have the street fair in the middle of the town. A lot of times the Eagles will do something on their end. Would they have to get their own special event permit if they expected more than 50 people in their parking lot because it's a special weekend? And like sometimes the car show and the other stuff that happens outside of the museum, does the museum then also have to ask for a special events permit for the same weekend, although they may be hosting different events overall, or like offshoot events? Or for example, there've been several tie-ins together with some local businesses that have been holding benefits for nonprofit organizations and stuff that may have gathered more than 50 people at any given time. Would that be considered a special event that they now have to go get a permit for? Or is it based on the capacity in which their the business itself or the location can hold and be above and beyond? I mean, they can't go above and beyond that, but where does that fall into line when you start talking about how that could affect the nonprofits in the various events?
So what I think you're talking about is situations where these nonprofits or other entities are inviting people into their buildings to participate in events that are happening at the same time as a special event. To me, that falls under their existing license, right? And under their existing capacity limits within their building. They already, as part of their normal operations, offer programs that bring significant number of people in, right? This isn't something that's that is not something that I would consider to be a special event. It is a part of their normal operations and a part of their normal occupancy.
Okay, so if they were to do something like outside of Blast from the Past, that's still outside of their occupancy. They don't need to go through the additional processes and filing of permits. Say if it's just like next weekend is no planned event in this, in the city incorporated with the chamber or any other issue, but say they wanted to team up with Helping Hands Food Bank and do some sort of promotion, or Rotary or something, and do something to benefit, or scholarship fund or something, and they brought in more than 50 people, is that considered a special event, and would they have to then file for permits?
If their building is able to host more than that 50, it's an occupancy issue at that point, from my perspective. If a normal part of their operation is to host these fundraisers or, events in their building, it's a commercial space, so
Okay.
that's not the events that we're trying to get at here.
Okay, so like local business that's holding pop-up shops and ladies' nights, or, like family-friendly event on the weekend to try to bring people in that may bring in 50 people or so at any given time, they wouldn't have to then ask for a special permit. I just want to make sure that we're clear, because I know I'm going to be asked.
Yeah, so that's a part of their commercial operation, not a part of
So if they're
something
like
that is not related to their business.
But if they're like a mortgage company, but they have empty space and allow that to be used for a gathering of some sort that's outside of the actual business model itself, would it then be considered a special event?
I don't consider that a
It's
special event. It's
commercial
not going to have any
space.
impact on public services, right?
Okay.
Because you have a commercial space that is available and has a maximum occupancy that you're not going to exceed, just because you're not going to violate the code.
Right.
And you're offering something that would be consistent with a commercial space.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, Councilman Cock, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, a quick question. This is probably obvious, but due to the First Amendment, religious organizations such as churches would be immune from this. It'd be nice if they asked for a permit, but they don't have to, right? Unless they're walking down the street.
No, that would tend to fall under the First and 14th Amendment
Right.
elements of the code.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So you have an opportunity here to actually read through the changes that are being recommended, and maybe you can cross-check it and compare it with the existing special events policy ordinance. And we'll be bringing this back. I don't know, is the next read going to be what would that be, the 12th or something like that?
Yeah, that's next week. Yeah, we
On
can
the 5th?
So
this is the 5th, so
Mayor-
we can bring it back next week on the 12th.
Okay, on the 12th.
Nikki?
are we sort of in agreement on the 250 for private property?
Everybody good with that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I will make that change.
So, but that is the 250 on private property. That has to do with if it's impacting other services, correct?
So that is the presumption number, right? So if we say 250, there's a presumption that 250 or more people gathering on private property will create an impact to police, public works, streets. It's going to have an impact. And so then that would be the trigger point for a special event permit.
Because I can see that happening in, you know, a residential neighborhood. My neighbor has a big birthday party for his grandson. All the parents and other friends all show up, but it's in a small lot and the cars fill the street up. That's going to impede, right? And so if they have a large property and there's a lot of cars there, I can see where it's relatable. So we can definitely wither that down over time from 100 to 50 to 25 to, if you have 15 people, that's going to put 15 cars in your neighborhood. We want a special offense permit. That's where the 250 kind of comes in. Kind of helps kind of pad that, I think, from preaching on people's private ability to.
I don't know, so you're saying that this is a buffer? Is that what you're saying?
The buffer, yeah. The 250 is a buffer in a big way.
Okay.
So here's another example of a private property or private event that could impact.
Oh, she froze up. You froze up, Nikki.
There was a desire to shut down. Oh,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
We can now, yeah, but you froze up, so we didn't hear what you first said.
Sorry. So
That's okay,
I gave an example of another instance which could be impactful on private property, and that would be like a block party. Say it's a private street instead of a public street, and, you know, the neighborhood decides they want to have a block party and shut down their cul-de-sac or something. That could definitely impact public services, because you could have overflow parking coming out towards the right-of-way, and, you know, I can see that being impactful.
And I'm thinking about emergency services. You know, if you have an overflow of vehicles and then an emergency happens, your emergency service vehicles would not be able to give immediate assistance. I guess for me, it's a safety issue.
I guess a thing that I'm noting too is that, have we ever had 100 cars in somebody's house in Sedro-Woolley where it's caused that problem? So I mean, we're kind of like, again, back, and we've done this a few times, throwing candy or various other things, where we'll create a municipal code to try or we'll update something in case of something random happens one day that's never happened before. So I think, you know, if it's at 250, then we can always lower it down if that ever happened.
Okay.
I will make that change.
All right. So if there are no other comments, suggestions? Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for walking us through that. Greatly appreciate that. Okay. With that, we've already had public comment. Kelly, is there anybody who has signed on there that? Okay, and he's already provided public comment. So, okay. With that, we are at about 9 minutes to 8, ready to adjourn. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.